Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's episode. In today's episode, the big idea is Duncan Simpson from IMG Academy. He's the assistant head of mental conditioning. So as you know it, we're going to get into the show today and we're going to talk about some systems and strategies to be successful with your mental game. Now, for those of you out there who don't know what IMG Academy is a boarding school and sports training destination in Bradenton, Florida. The boarding school offers an integrated academic and athletic college preparatory experience across 8 sports. Baseball, basketball, football, golf, lacrosse, soccer, tennis, track and field, and cross country. IMG Academy was established in 1978. So what does IMG mean? IMG itself was founded in 1960, originally known as the International Management Group, is a global sports, other events, and talent management company headquartered in New York City. It has been owned by William Morris Endeavor and Silver Lake Partners since 2003. Now, I know some of the big concepts around an athlete being invited or coming on board to the IMG Academy is passion, self-discipline, commitment, and dedication. Without further ado, I want to bring on to the show Dr. Duncan Simpson. Dr. Simpson, tell us about your experience and how you came to be employed or working with or partnering with IMG Academy.
Well, first of all, Deshaun, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I love your enthusiasm, and you gave a nice little background to the place where I work, where I feel very fortunate to work. A little bit of background, I came out to the United States in 2006 and went to the University of Tennessee and did my PhD. And from there, I went into academia, decided to be a professor in sports psychology, and I taught at Ithaca College at upstate New York, and then I was at Barry University in Miami, where we had an undergrad and master's program in sports psychology. I was there for 6.5 years, and then got the opportunity to come to IMG Academy, where I came on, as you mentioned, as the assistant head of mental conditioning. So I've been here since January 2017, and I've been loving every moment. And at the moment, it's in the middle of summer. We got a lot of summer campers here, so it's pretty crazy, but it's a fantastic place to work.
What brought you into the world of psychology, Dr. Simpson, or getting into mental conditioning?
It's interesting. I think a lot of us who have been in this field have probably been failed sportsmen or women at some stage. I played tennis and a little bit of soccer in college over in the UK. And, I wish my racket had been on a string because it would get thrown a lot. And I was a pretty ill-tempered player. And I think I was mentally pretty weak. And I felt like I had some physical skills, but lost way too many matches on the mental side of things. And I think reflecting back, that was an area that always struck me that I needed to be strong. And I didn't even know about this field, but then I managed to take some undergrad classes in sports psychology and so realized how much I enjoyed it and how it made sense, and wish that I had some of the information that I was now learning in my own short career as an athlete. And now I get the opportunity to help athletes at the at the high school age and also collegiate and professional age. So it's really kind of turned full cycle from me probably needing the help to me now being able to hopefully give some help to other athletes.
You know what, Dr. Simpson, I can certainly understand that, because from playing youth sports on up to high school and college and later some indoor football and then a couple of years playing some semi-pro football, I can definitely say I had a career of ups and downs when you talk about being mentally weak, sometimes being stronger, going back to being mentally weak, and just really having no systems and strategies in place to, be even keel at all times, in terms of reaching or going after success. So I can certainly understand what you're talking about. And I encountered an athlete who's now at the University of San Diego, about 5 years ago. And he was in a situation where he was struggling at his school, struggling communicating with the coaches, being the third teamer, being the second teamer. And he decided to stay at this school for his senior season. So we had to develop a plan for that. And my whole goal with him was I couldn't let him fail. So I had to hurry up and start reading and getting him to get him prepared for the psychological side of making it through the season and him being a success. And that was really the birth of Sports Mastery, just a lot of notes on napkins and note paper and giving assignments out that later turned into a Word document and then eventually a workbook. But I can appreciate your story, man. What else can you tell us about your experience at IMG Academy?
Well, I mean, it's a day-to-day job that I get to work with some of the most gifted athletes at a high school age. When I'm talking about the full-time academy athletes, some of the most gifted athletes in their sports, not only in the United States, perhaps across the world. So I feel very fortunate I get to work with tennis and golf and soccer, and some of our tennis players are over there now, about to compete in junior Wimbledon. We have, our junior golfers that are competing in top tournaments, going to, really prestigious Division I universities. So I feel very fortunate I get to work with some of the best, and then also get to work with some of the athletes that are just that level below and that are striving to, become a top recruit for a big college, or those that are just, their goal is to, try and get a college scholarship. So it's not just about, maximizing performance, but also we're hoping to churn out some pretty good people too. It's one thing to be a good athlete, but it's another thing to be a good person. So we're hoping to try and make that balance, that we graduate, great athletes, but hopefully even greater people from IMG.
I know you mentioned working with tennis, golf, and soccer athletes. Are there any differences when you consider working with like the young athlete from those three different disciplines or sports, or do you take the same approach?
No, I think you have to be very specific when you're working with different sports, because each sport has a different demand. Even if it's an individual sport like tennis, like golf, or something like gymnastics, it's still very sport specific. So the demands on the athletes is going to be very different. And then obviously soccer is a team sport, but soccer is a very different sport to something like football or baseball. So what I think about is, when I work with those athletes, is try and identify what would an ideal tennis player, or what would an ideal golfer look like? What are some of the skills that they would have, some mental skills that they would be able to use? And then, what would they look like in terms of attributes? So when I talk about a mental skill, I'm talking about, basic things like having a good routine as a tennis player or a golfer, having good positive self-talk, be able to set goals, those kind of hard skills that we can easily teach, being able to breathe. And then kind of what are the attributes? So, attributes would be, the outcomes that we're searching for. So be it confidence, making sure the athlete is composed, motivated, they have discipline, they have a growth mindset. What do we want from those athletes? So, for example, a difference with tennis and golf that I deal a lot with is, with golf, it's a very, precision-based sport, more so than tennis, and they have more time between shots. So we may spend a little more time on emotional regulation, whereas tennis, between points, you have 20 seconds or 25 seconds, depending on tournaments, that, we may not spend a lot of time in emotional regulation, but we focus, or we spend more time on focus, we spend more time on physical recovery. So depending on the sport is going to determine the outcomes that you're going to achieve within your athlete. So I think there's no cookie cutter answer. And I think any athlete out there, there's some great information out there, some generic things, but you have to find what works and know what works specific to your sport. There's not a magic top 10 that you can just tap into and that's going to be great. There's some generic topics that overlap, but you need to have very sport specific information.
Certainly. I know you mentioned emotional regulation. So you get it like a 14 or 15, maybe even 16-year-old kid. This could be a young woman at the same time that comes to the academy being a tennis or a golf athlete. They've never heard about or discuss the concepts of emotional regulation. So in terms of mental preparation, where do you start with that as far as introducing the concepts of emotional regulation and convincing a young athlete, be it boy or girl, to work on that?
It's actually pretty much a hot topic that we're really trying to figure out. Part of my role is really trying to figure out what we should be doing for each age group. For example, emotional regulation in adolescence is extremely difficult because of the maturity just of the brain, and their ability to actually regulate emotion is not something that is fully developed yet. So it is a concept we'll talk about. For example, how I would introduce it would be, let's identify, when you play at your best, how do you feel? When we're talking about emotions, we're talking about how do you feel? And, when they come back with, I felt calm, and I wasn't overthinking, and, I didn't have much nerves, and I was focused, and, so outlining, how did they feel in certain situations? And then we're just aiming to try and repeat those feeling states. But again, I think emotional regulation in adolescence, which is the primary group that I'm working with at the moment, is extremely challenging, because for some of them, that part of the brain is overly active. The amygdala is really overly active, and to help them to use those skills is quite a challenge. I mean, what we usually see is we see the outcome. We see someone being angry, and kids and adolescents understand when they're angry. We know what that is, but they can't always identify when they're getting angry and how to control that anger. So I think we have to meet the athlete where they are. So sometimes it's recognizing, okay, you're going to pick the battles that make most sense. So for example, with an athlete who gets angry, maybe, okay, you may feel the emotion of anger, but what's your behavioral response to that? Is it to smash your racket? Is it to kind of lose focus and go down a kind of a spiral? Or is it, once I get angry, I recognize that, and then I use that, I have my outburst, or I manage to say something to myself, and then I refocus. So it's not so much we're able to control it as much as we'd like, but it's once it's manifested itself, how do we bring it back and use it, trying to almost in a productive way if possible? How can we help the athlete use that to refocus on the task that they're currently doing? So emotional regulation, you picked it, but emotional regulation in adolescence is extremely challenging, as any parents out there who are listening probably know, or if anybody has a brother or sister in the adolescent age, will recognize how difficult it was. I know I went through it when I was in adolescence, where I was not good at controlling my emotional regulation. So right. I think sometimes we try and do things that are a little bit too challenging. We treat adolescents as young adults, and maybe they are in chronological age, but cognitively, how they've developed, they're not there yet. So meeting the athlete where they are, I think, is the big kind of message, and not to think that we're doing anything wrong, or even they're doing anything wrong. They just may not be able to develop that skill at that particular age.
Yes, I think it's something that we definitely have to consider more from a global coaching community, whether you're playing football, baseball, basketball, track, or you're the coach of those sports. And we wonder why athletes are doing certain things, why they act a certain way emotionally, and definitely with their decision making. It almost begs to say that you have to have someone around to help put in plans and systems and strategies, for success, outside of the sport, because we know that the brain is still developing. Decisions aren't going to always be the best. Emotions aren't going to be like an adult, That's why we have to watch how we talk to certain athletes, because how you talk to one, you can't talk to the next person, because we don't know where their emotional state is, or what they might do after that, or what it might trigger based on what they have going on at home. So I think what you said, man, is really powerful. And we have to consider that as like the head sports coaches of teams and organizations from middle school, high school, and definitely on into college. You know, I heard an interesting thing. This is last year. I actually worked with a gentleman's daughter, and he happens to be a sports psychologist. And he explained, we got to talking all things football. And he alluded that the University of Alabama, just for the football team alone, they have 3 psychologists, 3 licensed psychiatrists, and then another 3 licensed clinical social workers. So I found it interesting that you hear teams, you know, like taking this route, you know, to make sure they get the best and most out of their student athletes on and off the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at the collegiate environment, it's, you know, how do we best support these young athletes? And when I say young, we are speaking young in terms of a developmental standpoint. We know that some of the brain isn't developed, the prefrontal cortex, where complex decision making and planning and isn't really developed till after the age of 24. So that's after they finish college. So, you know, we're asking, you know, put kids under, I say kids, and I use that term very loosely, but we're asking young men and young women to take on a lot of, you know, a lot of pressure in big, you know, for example, the University of Alabama, you're asking kids to take on a lot of pressure to play sport at really the highest level for their peer group. And, you know, any decision, decision they make outside of practice, on the field, you know, in social media, everything's going to be scrutinized, and we're expecting them to be perfect. Well, unfortunately, that brings a burden on the young people. And that's not to say that we can't teach accountability and we can't teach them, you know, different ways to navigate those things. Absolutely. But we also have to understand they are young people and they are going to make mistakes. So having a support system in place, whether it's a mental coach, a clinical sports psychologist, psychiatrists, social workers, I think a multidisciplinary team that can support them, I think that's fantastic. So I applaud any university that hires, you know, qualified people that know about athletics that can support these young athletes. I think that's fantastic.
Yes, I want to switch lanes, Dr. Simpson. You know, I know you've worked with athletes that have made mistakes, that have gave games away, might have missed a putt at a key time, maybe gave up a goal when they shouldn't have. You know, we have this fear of failure. Sometimes it's fear of competition, where we play well in practice and then we fold at game time. Sometimes it's the doubt and anxiety of having mom and dad at the game. Sometimes it's just, you know, just a plain out fear of failure. How do you work with your athletes in terms of overcoming setbacks?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, meeting them again where they're at. So thinking about the sport that they participate in, and I think sometimes looking at factual information. Sometimes I'll sit down with, so for example, tennis players, and I'll say, look, well, you know, you're going to lose, you know, about around 50% of the points that you play. On any given year, the statistics are out there. Djokovic in his best ever year won 56% of his points. So that meant he lost 44% of his points. So we're talking about the best player in the world at the time was losing, you know, close to half the points that he participated in. If you're a soccer player, you know, point to the player that's played a perfect game. Point to the, you know, football player that's played an absolute perfect game, or, you know, the baseball player. You know, there's very few examples where you can say, okay, yeah. So if we look at top level sport and say, look, these people make mistakes. It's not that mistakes don't happen. Mistakes happen. It's how you respond to mistakes that really matter. So the reality is trying to alleviate some of this need for perfection, that we have to be perfect. And I think, for the most part, I've been around coaches that are pretty good at just saying, okay, we're going to strive for excellence, but recognizing that we're not going to reach perfection. We're just trying to be the best we can possibly be on that day. So I think that's really important for athletes, as a kind of a core understanding, is that if you're beating everybody you compete against, you're playing on the wrong playing field. If you're winning every single match, you're playing people who are too easy. You've
Right.
got to be testing yourself against players that are better than you. Here at the academy, that we have a group structure where sometimes the athletes get a little nervous about playing players from a lower group, because if they lose to a player from a lower group, what does that say about them?
Right. Right. I'm laughing, but I know it's not funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
I've
it's
been
true.
there.
Everyone has that. We tie our, and it's not just to these athletes. It's everyone. We tie our ego into winning and losing, and it's really hard for athletes to separate. Okay, hey, I competed really well, and I may not have won, but I did everything I can. So we really, try and teach them kind of the fundamentals of those, and then recognizing that, setbacks, come before the comeback. So recognizing that setbacks happen. Every athlete that has ever participated, we give them prime examples of players that have struggled, players that have been through difficult times, and how they've managed to come back in whatever sport they're participating in. So recognizing that even the very best, sometimes we'll go through setbacks. I mean, as an example, when we work with basketball players, we'll use the draft report of Steph Curry and say, look, this is what people are saying about Steph Curry coming out of college. He's too small. He's never physical enough. He can't drive to the basket. He can't do X, Y, and Z. His scouting report is out there so people can see it. And so, well, he was coming out of college and people were saying that this guy can't play. And it was now two-time MVP and two-time NBA champion.
Right.
So we try and use examples of people that say, look, every athlete that you look at, we see the sports center, we see the top 10, and we see them winning championships, but we don't always see the struggle. We don't always see the challenges that they went through to get to where they are. We just see the end product. But when you look at everyone's backstory, it's like, hey, these are things that I can learn from. I can learn from the hard work, the focus. They overcame adversity early in their career. That they were cut from a team, like obviously Michael Jordan. They were too small. Like Lionel Messi was being told that he was too small, would never make it as a soccer player.
I heard that story too.
Yeah, there's all these examples out there whereby everybody who makes it to the top has been through some form of setback. Now, I'm not trying to make it cliche that everyone needs to fail and failure is a good thing, because I think that can be a little bit cliche. There's nothing wrong with success when players are successful, but I think the reality is that you're gonna struggle, you're gonna have failure, and that will make you stronger in the long run. It's how you respond to it and how you look at that failure. I never want my athletes to lose. That's not what I'm not in that business. I'm not a tough person on them. I don't want them to lose, but sometimes a loss is not necessarily a bad thing when they can learn from it. So I think it's making sure you shape it in the right way, and athletes understand that everything, another case cliche would be everything, there is a learning opportunity through it if we view it in the right way.
You know what? I agree 100%. Students, if you're out there listening to this, moms and dads, coaches, mentors, if you're listening to this, you have to put your student athlete or your kids in a position where their competition is paired or they're playing like at a slightly higher level. Because like Dr. Simpson said, if you're winning every time, you're on the wrong field, diamond, or track. You want to be somewhere to a state, get into a mindset, get around competition that's going to challenge you. And just remember, losing or coming up short sometimes is okay. It's just what you do after that. Can you learn from it? Are you willing to watch the film to fix your technical errors? Are you willing to watch the film to work on your tactical errors and things of that sort? Dr. Simpson, we mentioned overcoming setbacks, mental preparation. How do you integrate or how do you communicate with the strength coach in terms of physical preparation and the mental side?
Well, I mean, I think they overlap. I'm lucky that I get to work with a fantastic strength and conditioning team here at IMG, and we really try and integrate ourselves as best possible. So if I'm talking about a topic, for example, discipline, maybe a topic I'm trying to exemplify that day, I'm making sure that the strength and conditioning coach is, trying to get across those key points. Discipline in strength conditioning, maybe if he's our strength coach Justin, who's works with tennis, if I'm talking discipline, it may be that day that making sure that every single activity that they're doing in the weight room or out on the track is, if he says touch the line, you better touch that line. If he says touch the chest with the bench press, you touch the chest with the bench press. So having the discipline to do what you've been told to do. And then, there's other things. So, for example, fear of failure. If that's the topic, then it may be that we're pushing an athlete to do something that they're not quite comfortable with, not putting them in physical jeopardy, but really pushing their boundaries in terms of, well, what if I make a mistake, or getting them to do something in front of an audience. So again, trying to make sure that the skills that I'm teaching are integrated within physical conditioning, because a strong mind and a strong body are a deadly combination. But I think a strong mind with a weak body is not going to get you too far. So we need to make sure that we have, and a strong body and a weak mind will get you so far, but it won't get you to the very top. It can get you quite far, but it's not going to get you to the real top. So I think, we recognize that both of our spaces, both our areas of expertise overlap, and we need to work together to help each other. And the concepts from, strength and conditioning, some of the best motivators I've ever known are the strength and conditioning coaches. So what did they do? How did they inspire their athletes, and what can I use from them? So we're trying to develop, synergistic relationships, making sure that they know that we're part of a support team to support the athlete, and making sure that the message that I'm carrying over gets over to the strength coach, it gets over to the athletic trainers, it gets over to the coaches, and then the message that the coaches are giving across, that we're not contradicting, that we're all on the same page, and we're all trying to help the athlete develop.
Dr. Simpson, I know you've probably worked with some athletes, definitely tennis and more than likely soccer, whether they've had an ACL injury, rolled an ankle, sprained an ankle, tore a hamstring. What systems and strategies do you use on your athletes to bounce back after injury to be successful?
Oh, injuries. Injury is a tough one. Injury is a reality of sport, but it's a complex one from a psychological point of view. I won't get too much into it in terms of kind of the research point of view, but it really matters kind of how, when, what has happened with the injury. So, for example, if you're a soccer player, what part of your body got injured? If you broke your arm, it's not as important as if you broke your leg. I'm just giving a kind of a trite example, but how it happened. Did it happen in practice? Did it happen in a match? What's the kind of, how long are you going to how long is it going to take to come back? Have you injured this part of your body before, and have you been through rehab before? So, for example, if you take an athlete who's pulled a hamstring before, knows what they're expected to do, knows how long it will take, that it may not, from a psychological point of view, it may be a little annoying, but it may be relatively easy to come back from if it's in the summer and it's the time off season. Now, you take a different athlete and you take it, just before nationals in college. They've never been injured before. This is their senior season. They may miss nationals, and they've pulled a hamstring, but they've never had this before. Then the psychological response to that injury is going to be very different to the other athlete, just because of the time of the season and a lot of contextual information. So injury is a very challenging one to deal with, and some of my most rewarding and most difficult athletes that I've ever worked with has been through injury. And I'll give you a quick example. I worked with a female soccer player. She was going into her senior season. She was touted to be All-American and to be the leading goal scorer in her college. And in her second game of preseason going into her senior season, she was also captain. She blew out her ACL. And she was absolutely devastated, like literally as if somebody had died. And she took an extremely difficult it was a very traumatic event for her. And, I managed to, be there for her and just spend a lot of time. And, I'd never seen this girl be particularly emotional, but she really she really broke down and really struggled with it. And we worked through the situation, and she managed to, redshirt that year and actually ended up transferring and playing her final season at another college in graduate school, which was a nice, kind of unexpected situation for her. But my point with that is that she wrote me an email about 2 years afterwards, just really out of the blue, just saying how much she thanked me for being there for her. And I haven't had that from every athlete I worked with. I haven't had that from the majority, but through that really difficult time, that was something that really stuck with her. So injured athletes can be extremely traumatic. So coming back to your question, Deshaun, that was a long way to answer. I think the first thing is to be there for the athlete. Try and understand, try and listen, try and be empathetic, and try and spend time with the athlete and see what they need, what the athletes need. Because we can make a lot of assumptions. It can be a very serious injury, and we can assume that they're going to really struggle with it. And that's not always the case. If they've been injured before, they may be okay with it. I've even had athletes that are injured and they're okay to miss game time because they don't want to be under that pressure. As strange as that sounds, I've had athletes like that. They don't mind being injured. That sounds like an anomaly, but that actually happens quite frequently. And then you can have an athlete that has what you'd define as a minor injury. You're out for 2 weeks, perhaps, and it's like the end of the world to them. So I think when we see the injury, we may make assumptions, but I think if we just try and spend time with that athlete, get to know them, understand where they're coming at, the context around the injury, how it occurred, and time in the season, and how they're thinking about it, then we can be in a position by which to help them moving forward, and we can put plans in place. And another thing that I work closely with when I have an injured athlete, I work closely with our athletic trainers to make sure that we're best serving the athlete the best possible. I'm not an injury expert, so I need to know what the athlete's telling me is true. So I'll work with athletic trainers to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're working towards the same goals.
Parents and coaches, if you're listening to Dr. Simpson, you have to remember that we have to talk to our athletes. Our relationships are constantly evolving. We have to learn to listen, and grow our listening skills. And then always figuring out what the athlete needs or what the athlete wants so we can make the appropriate and proper adjustments. You've heard it here first with Dr. Duncan Simpson. My role is to help student athletes develop the mental skills for success in sports, which carry over to their life as well. I work with normal people who are under additional perceived pressures to perform in their sport. My goals are to teach student athletes how to be more confident, focus better, stay composed under pressure, practice more efficiently, and develop more effective pre-game routines. I become an extension of the athlete's support team. Unlike a psychotherapist or psychologist, I do not use couches, prescribe medicines, or work with abnormal behavior. The main difference between my sports mastery program and a psychotherapist is that I work with athletes on sports performance enhancement. I tend not to get into personal challenges such as divorce, breakups, grief counseling, or abnormal behavior. Although those areas of life do affect sports performance, when need be, they are addressed. My philosophy is that you cannot separate the mental from the physical when it comes to performance. After all, decisions, thoughts, images, and feelings drive motor behavior. So how do you know when you need or could benefit from my sports mastery program? My goal is to help the student athlete identify barriers to hard work, identify barriers to teamwork, and enhance sports performance by improving mental skills for success. Do you have any doubts about your sport before or during competition? Do you get so anxious that you don't have a calm mind or think straight in competition? Become easily frustrated when things do not go according to plan? So when you consider these questions, the next obvious question is this: when is my sports mastery program needed? You don't perform well when others are watching you. The sports mastery program is needed when you maintain doubt about your sport before or during games. You feel anxious or scared when you perform in competition. So how can the student athlete benefit from the sports mastery coaching program? They will have improved focus and the ability to concentrate and manage distractions. Develop systems and strategies to increase confidence and eliminate doubts and fears. Develop coping skills to deal with setbacks and errors. Find the right zone of intensity for their sport. The student athlete will also learn to develop and enhance communication skills. The student athlete will benefit by learning to develop a healthy belief system and identify irrational thoughts. The student athlete would also benefit when they learn to improve and balance motivation for optimal performance, develop confidence post-injury. The student athlete will benefit from my sports mastery program by learning to identify and enter the zone more often. At the end of the day, my sports mastery program does not apply to a wide variety of athletes. This program is for the serious athletes only. Most of my student athletes are in junior high, high school, and college. However, they are highly committed to excellence in seeing how far they can go in their sports. My sports mastery program is not something they need, it's something that they want. These student athletes love competition and testing themselves against the best in their sport. They understand the importance of positive attitude and mental toughness. These student athletes want every possible advantage they can get, including the mental edge over competition. The first thing we do is identify the student athlete's hopes and dreams, pains and fears, and barriers and limitations. This serves as a guideline and helps the student athlete to think about mindset. When we first meet in person or virtually, I ask more questions about mindset and beliefs based on assessment results, so we can develop a complete picture of your mental game. Once the game plan is developed, we will begin our work on mental skills that apply to your current and specific challenges. I present a sports mastery program that is customized to the athlete's individual needs. I always include the core foundation mental skills for all of my athletes. We apply the sports mastery concepts and skills to practice, pre-performance preparation, warm-up routines, and post-performance assessments. The next step is to decide if my sports mastery program is something you want. Not everyone wants to take the time to learn about mindset and how it affects an individual sports performance. I can tell you by participating in my sports mastery program, you'll set yourself apart from other student athletes. I help the student athlete transform, shake their limiting beliefs, silence monkey mind chatter, and equip them with the tools to succeed. Sports Mastery will provide you with the tools to maximize your game in competition and in the classroom. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/coaching.